Again, my name is Lily Liu, and I'm the founder and CEO of Public Stuff, which is a suite of online and mobile phone-based tools for local government agencies. Now, what's interesting about what we do is, A, we're in the public sector, and immediately when I say that, it strikes fear in a lot of people. And we're also a startup, so it's truly a dichotomy of, every single day when we're in the office, we're acting like a tech startup, and then we're talking to government agencies and city managers and mayors, and it's truly conflicting goals every single day. So we're always challenged with how do we match what we're doing in the startup world along with government and policy. So a little background on the company. So I'm going to give you some history about Public Stuff, where I came from, and how we were able to spearhead and get a lot of people to support the idea and get it off the ground. So we've been in business for about a little over 2 years now, and we're backed by some of the best VCs in the country, so Lair Ventures, First Round Capital, the folks behind Facebook, and Groupon, and we eventually got them to believe in the concept of selling to local governments and innovating in local governments, which we're their first investment in the public sector space, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how we were able to do that. So, Public Stuff is a suite of online and mobile phone-based tools. It allows communities to be much more efficient and communicative. So, if you see a pothole, noise complaint, broken street light in your day-to-day lives, you can go ahead and report that online or through your mobile phone-based tools. Now, when you think about how you feel about local government, if I were to ask you, you might have some responses like, well, I had to wait in line at the DMV, or there was a huge pothole, or my neighbors are really noisy and the government didn't do anything about it, or I had to wait on hold or in line for 30 minutes. And so it's really about these transactional things that formulate your opinions about your local government. And so we're working to change that. Now, local governments oftentimes will have something called 311, which is a non-emergency version of 911. You call 911 for emergencies, 311 for non-emergencies. And we're looking to replace that entire call center process online and through mobile phone-based tools. So New York City, for example, we're working on a deal with them that's going to cut out about $45 million from their annual budget, which is currently what their call center costs. So that's a little bit of background in terms of our product. When we started 2 years ago, it was myself and one other person. So it really was just a small group of people that were passionate about an industry, an idea, and about changing the way things were currently done. So Liz gave some background about my professional history, and so I started in local government, and I worked for Long Beach and LA County, and one of my big projects there was implementing 311. Long story short, we spent about $500,000 planning the project. A year into the project, we had to cancel it because it was way too expensive for the city to afford, and that's when I started to think about ways in which we could innovate on top of that process. We knew every single price point, vendor, process, solution that was out there in the market, and there wasn't anything cost-effective, simple to use for government agencies. So that's where the seed of innovation started. So we're in 120 cities today. That's this was as of a few months ago. Currently we're actually in 150 cities, so this is a little bit outdated. But that's in less than 2 years from zero to full speed. So again, when I pitched VCs, they were so scared because the moment I said public sector, they were looking elsewhere. They were looking at their phone. They weren't paying attention to us and our message. And so the first few times we did it, we realized, hey, you know what? We have to tighten up our message. We have to understand how to motivate people to support our ideas and our initiatives. And I think this is a sort of a train of thought that you can apply to what you're doing within your organization as well. How do you actually start to garner support for what you're working on? What we realize is that there's no better story than actually seeing it in action and being able for us to showcase the traction that we've seen. And so, at first it was just an idea. We pitched an idea, a concept, a belief, and we used some stats and numbers, and it was all very academic and all very thought out. But at the end of the day, these people that could help bring this idea to fruition, they wanted to see tests. They wanted us to see to experience some traction, and they wanted us to go out and talk to our customers and actually implement it. And so that's really when we started to go out to cities, local government agencies, and talk with them. What are their needs? What can we build that would truly innovate, but also be accepted by local government reps? And so we started to do small tests, and we failed a lot. A lot of those tests didn't work. A lot of the tools and features that we pushed out weren't sticking, and we had to force it too much. And so about 7 months into the process, we were able to really solidify our message. We had a lot of proof points and a lot of use cases that had come out of our discussions with these cities. And so that's the message, and that's the story we ended up pitching. About 8 months ago is when we landed our VC Seed Series A deal. So we're super excited that we were able to do that, but we've learned so much in the process. If and when we were ever to have to mobilize additional funders or in our sales process, it's about really testing it out, doing a lot of trials, and at least in software development they say, iterate often, iterate quickly, and you're going to learn so much in that process. And so that's what we do, even when applying our business concepts and fundraising. So a little bit more about public stuff. Here's an interesting example of how our processes, our solution, they are changing the way in which people interact day to day. And that's really what motivates us. It's not writing software. It's not, 300 more lines of code. It's really how can the tools that we make impact the lives of people. And so here's an example of a woman in California who reported 2 huge palm trees in her front lawn. She reported this mobily, and it was sent to managing staff on the back end in the city. The staff would normally have to send out their trucks to this house. They would have to check out the palm trees. They would have to do an assessment, verify it, then it can be turned into a work order. So it's a process, right? And that normally costs them about $500,000 for each trip, which is pretty expensive when aggregated in the total number of these requests that they get. So with this, they immediately eliminated that step in the process. So that's a huge ROI and a huge cost savings for them. But what excites us about this is it's truly changing their day-to-day workflow, and it's making them much more efficient. Here's another example of the same exact thing. Staff didn't have to go out and assess the down street sign. They were able to go out there. Their turnaround time was in less than 2 days for this resident, and the resident didn't have to wait in line. They didn't have to drive to City Hall, and they had a lot of back and forth communication. We have another internal portal which really allows the resident to communicate with their staff, and so it's pretty interesting for you to be able to talk directly to the staff when in your government that's fixing the things that affect your day-to-day life on your street, in your commute, things like that. So one more example, and then I'll get into sort of the broader issues that I want to talk about. But in Plano, Texas, one of our customers, they had an interesting scenario where their water source was infected by zebra mussels, which is sort of an interesting thing. And not only did that happen, but they also are in a drought period right now, which is fairly common in that area. But as a result, heavy restrictions on their water usage. And so in Plano, Texas, normally what they do is they send their staff out, they try to track as many violations or water leaks as possible, but their staff is only limited to do, a certain number a day. So what they did is they ran a campaign on public stuff, and they were able to get over 2,000 reports, and it just exponentially increased the amount of eyeballs and the amount of people being able to report and interact on these issues, helping them to really save their limited resources. So these are the kind of stories that really excite us and they motivate us. And I think it's in understanding and defining what your end goal is to then innovate towards. And so that's really what keeps us going day to day, are stories like this. So now I want to talk a little bit about how you can apply innovative tools and methods to what you're doing internally, and be an entrepreneur in whatever project you're working on. So here's a good quote, and I'm going to use a lot of quotes. So one's ability to generate innovative ideas is not merely a function of the mind, but also a function of behaviors. If we can change our behaviors, we can improve our creative impact. So I think a lot of times, at least in people that some people that I really admire, and they talk about innovation, but it's all very vague. and it's hard to really get a grasp of, hey, how can I apply what this person is doing. I really look up to Steve Jobs, for example, and I'm reading his book right now. But a lot of that is not replicable. You know, you can't be Steve Jobs, and you can't replicate the things he would do on a day-to-day basis. But certainly, if we start to dissect the process of innovation a little bit more, I think there are some trends and some things that you can do behaviorally in your day-to-day processes to start to innovate. So Western Union sent out a memo right as the telephone was getting invented. And their memo basically said, hey, listen, the telephone, we don't recommend it. We don't see a use in it in our day-to-day activities, and therefore they didn't go ahead initially with supporting the telephone. Well, it's sort of a ridiculous concept. The same thing was said about the laptop, and tons of manufacturers said, hey, there's no place for a computer at home. Computers should only exist in large corporations. And so it really just showcases how when you bring up an idea, you're always going to get pushback. And if it's a good idea, and if it truly is disruptive, and it truly will have a great impact, you're going to absolutely get some pushback on even the greatest innovations that we've seen. And so it's a story, it's a trend that we saw when we were going and fundraising and doing sales in the public sector. There's no way you can do it. There's no place for governments to communicate more effectively. They're inherently inefficient. You can never improve it, right? And so that was a message we heard often, but you really have to keep going even though you hear that. So innovation requires a few grumpy people. And I really think this is true. You know, when I was working at LA County, I was frustrated. I was frustrated with the process. I was frustrated with a lack of solutions out there in the market. And it was that proactive frustration that really allowed me to start to brainstorm with other folks at Carnegie Mellon, where I got my master's, and really start to think, hey, how can we utilize more cost-effective tools? But when you think about some of the best ideas today, Facebook, Groupon, for example, none of these, eBay, none of these examples were unique ideas. They were all ideas that started with somebody being frustrated with, MySpace or Friendster. It just wasn't, it wasn't quite there yet. And, Mark Zuckerberg saw all of these examples but thought, hey, you know what, I'm going to tweak it. I can make this better. I'm frustrated with this because it's not doing X, Y, and Z. And so it's really about not pushing towards having a unique idea that nobody else has ever had, or coming up with that one innovative idea, but it's really about innovating on top of what people are doing right now and processes that are currently in place. So I think that's step one, is really understanding what is frustrating you, identifying the problems day to day that are impacting your performance, or maybe are you experiencing a hiccup in your project? What is that you want to try to make better, that if that problem didn't exist, you could be successful? So how would Lady Gaga design a chocolate dessert? This is an example of applying a concept of having somebody else, putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. So if they were to look in on your problem, what would they do differently? How would they maybe look at the problem? What kind of questions would they ask? And that's always the first step that we take at Public Stuff in thinking about how to innovate in what we're doing and around our processes, whether it's a sales process, whether it's a tech issue, whether it's a design issue, even with some lobbying and legislation issues. We always think, is there a different way to do it, and what at the core is the problem that we're trying to define? So the important and difficult job is never to find the right answers, it's to find the right questions. So you really need to get to the heart of what questions you need to ask to be able to figure out how to innovate effectively. And I say innovate effectively, again, coming back to the idea that we don't have to strive to be the unique individual idea that's never been thought of, but really, how do you innovate to make things better? And I think the first step, again, is talking about the right questions. And I think that's the hardest part, because we're always trying to think of answers, but oftentimes the framing of the problem is wrong. And so the perfect problem will never have an answer, right? But the problems that you identify in what you're doing here at work, chances are there's a solution. All solutions will be flawed.